We are live now. Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, July the 15th, 2025. It is in the middle of the hot, humid New York summer here, and I think it's hot and humid up in Maine, where Michelle and Rudi are as well. For me, summer is the ultimate liminal space, at least in childhood. Summer, for me, always meant that endless sense of time. It meant fireflies and it meant humidity, and it was just it was liminal space before I even knew what the word meant. So perfect time to celebrate. This is the Creatures of Liminal Space launch celebration. I'm really excited and grateful to have my two friends and colleagues here with me. Please, I'll introduce them fully in a moment, but please welcome Rudi Dornemann and Michelle Souliere. Did I say it correctly?
You did.
Which I've known, and I've known these two for so long, and of course, showing off my X-Men superpower of fumbling words here. But I also want to introduce Dan Sauer, who is not with us. I was hoping that he might be able to be our secret guest, but he's not going to be our secret guest. But we just want to have a shout out to Dan, who is the publisher and the illustrator of the books as well. But we'll mention him as we go on. So Michelle Souliere is an author and artist who lives in Portland, Maine, where she graduated from the Maine College of Art. She owns the Green Hand Bookshop, a used bookshop located near historic Longfellow Square. And anyone who's been listening to Nighttime Logic series, I mentioned the Green Hand Bookshop almost every episode. Her work, both written and drawn, is driven by curiosity and inspired by Maine history, the Maine landscape, and how we respond to it. Her Strange Maine Gazette and its companion blog gave rise to her first book, Strange Maine, True Tales from the Pine Tree State, which is published by the History Press in 2010. Following that, she published Bigfoot in Maine in 2021. She continues to travel around the state, researching Bigfoot in Maine, Volume 2, in addition to other odd historic research volumes. So you can buy books from her at the Green Hand Bookshop. Find that in the story in our event page notes, which is also thegreenhandbookshop.com, or follow her online on Instagram at greenhandbooks, or Souliere, which I'll spell that out, for her Strange Maine content and cats. Welcome, Michelle. So great to have you here. And welcome to Rudi Dornemann as well. Rudi is a writer of science fiction and fantasy and other odd things. Welcome back to the channel, Rudi. Rudi is a native of Milwaukee. He now lives in Portland, Maine with his wife, a couple of cats, and a large number of books. Some of them, which we can see in the background there. I have book envy that my books are not on display behind me. His stories have been published in venues including the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Realms of Fantasy, Strange Horizons, The Daily Cabal, and more. He sends out fiction through a monthly email newsletter, which is called Notes from an Imaginary Place. Each installment are also available as a podcast. The first 26 installments will be an architectural alphabet from archive to ziggurat, although not necessarily in that order. Each one is meant to put you in another fairly fantastical place for 15 minutes or so of reading or listening time. You can find him at his website, which is in the show notes as well, rudidornemann.com. Welcome, Rudi. Great to see you.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about Rudi's work. We're going to talk about Michelle's work, and we're going to talk about the new book, Creatures of Liminal Space. So before we jump into talking about cryptids and settings and fantastic spaces, I'll introduce a new book. It's called Creatures of Liminal Space. It's been put out by Jackanapes Press. It is published by Dan Sauer, who also did the wonderful illustrations of it. Please. The illustrations doesn't really do it justice holding it up to a screen. So go to jackanapespress.com where you can see a bunch of the illustrations there. I'm going to do a brief reading from one of the stories of the book. I will put myself on solo screen. I'll introduce it, and then we'll be back, and we're going to be talking with Rudi and Michelle. Hello to everyone in the comments. A lot of my friends and colleagues are there, so hello. This is a story. I'm going to read a few pages of it. I'm going to be doing a couple of short readings. I'm going to read from the beginning of this story. I'm going to be reading from the end of another story at the end. So this is the beginning, just a few pages of a story called Where the Jaguar King Lives in the Dark Heart of the Wood. Here's a wonderful illustration by Dan Souliere. It is said that the Jaguar King lives in the dark heart of the wood, watching over all the cats. The wood's proper name is the Coxcomb Basin Wildlife Preserve and Jaguar Sanctuary, 150 square miles of tropical forest. All 5 of the cat species that dwell in Belize can be found there: jaguar, puma, jaguarundi, margay, and ocelot. Sunset Rick is an American expat. He runs a 2-unit vacation place, Sunset Rick's, in the little beach town not terribly far from Coxcomb. He's at Rosalinda and Enrique Alvarez's farm, which borders the eastern edge of the preserve, picking up his order for the week. The pre-dawn sky is still a glistening carpet of stars, illuminating the clearing where the Alvarez's vegetables are growing. Rick looks to the jungle, a living wall teeming with layers and overlapping layers of buzzing and clicking that looms over the farm. He walks to his pickup truck, bags of produce and dairy in hand, and scans the shadows and spaces between tree trunks for motion. The guests due into his second cabin, June and Andy from New York, are arriving this afternoon. The thought of flying, even on one of the puddle jumpers that are the only planes that land on the airstrip, reignites a little flower of unease in his beer gut belly. It has been decades since it has been his job to keep one of those rumbling metal behemoths in the air, circling to and from the fail-safe points day in, day out, armed with a nuke and extra fuel. And it's been decades since he crashed the little plane he had here out in the jungle, the last time he ever flew at all. He's grateful for the fragrant smell of wet earth and flowers and green and the hint of smoke from someone's trash fire in the damp, almost morning air. A morning doesn't go by that he does not at least think about kissing the ground and small swatch of beach where he's made his home. He doesn't tell guests the Air Force is where he got the name Sunset Rick. He doesn't tell guests he knows how to fly at all. He does tell them he spends his time drawing and watching for birds and for big cats if he's lucky. He's always on the lookout. Jaguars are tough, if not near impossible to spot. Most visitors and locals alike will never, ever see one. A shape moves across the Alvarez's field. Black on black, just a shadow, or is something there? He knows the jaguar he calls Cygnus likes to venture out from Coxcomb during the night to rummage in garbage for easy pickings before returning at dawn. Rick holds still and squints, and yes, he sees her, right where the green jungle meets the farm. She's there, just inside the line, just inside the boundary of the preserve, where it is illegal to harm her, illegal to shoot any jaguar. She's trotting along, openly, brazenly, not concealing herself, as she is so capable of doing, as if she knows the boundary and knows the rules somehow. Maybe she knows he'd never, ever even think about shooting her. Maybe she knows Enrique Alvarez would love to blast her, as would several others who live nearby, who do not share his awe and appreciation. These people think twice before shooting, not only to be sure their quarry is outside the border. They know Sunset Rick isn't the only one watching. They've heard the stories. The Jaguar King is out there, watching over the cats, protecting them, even avenging them. Rick has been here 20 plus years, 1 full year before Coxcomb was founded, and while he has his notions, he can't say for sure if all the stories are true. He's also never seen a jaguarundi, yet he knows that doesn't mean these most reclusive of the cats are not real. Cygnus halts, turns her head, and looks Rick's way. She can smell him. Knew he was present long before he had any hint of her. Rick wonders if she's contemplating the Jaguar King too. A raucous toucan call, the first sign of day, punctures the nighttime cacophony. The jaguar bounds off, her spots and sleek feline contour becoming one with the tangle and brush as she flees the coming morning for places where daylight cannot reach. June and Andy watch as the little Cessna, which they and their luggage deplaned from just a minute ago, reaches speed and lifts into the air at the point where the dirt strip of a runway ends at the Caribbean Sea. Sunset Rick is watching them from the shade of a rusty tin roof held up by 4 poles at the corners that is the airport. He swings open a hinged section of the rusted remains of something that once upon a time was a barrier and says welcome. Andy doesn't like the way the old expat looks June up and down as she's hunting for her smokes, but he's used to it. She's in a t-shirt with Duran Duran's Rio album cover on it, half tucked into a pair of black denim cutoffs. Bruises from iron deficiency in various stages of fading mar her pale legs. Her short shock of hair that was once punk during the days when she purchased the t-shirt remains short now for efficiency, not style. Endless hours at the shop and time with her niece and every iota of sleep is what counts. Though she feels she cleans up nice on the date nights Andy every so often persuades her into. She lights up a clove cigarette, a real one, contraband Andy provides for her, somehow, even though it has been years since Obama banned them. Andy doesn't want her to smoke, yet he keeps her flush with them because her money is tight and he knows how much she loves them. She takes a big pull, inhales like her life depends upon it, then realizes the men have already loaded the luggage. The 3 of them fit easily into the front of the truck. The windows are down, Belize's heat is palpably real. The November snow and all the crushing minutiae they've left behind is a ghost unable to dwell in it. First time here, you two? Sunset Rick asks. I come to Belize a lot, Andy says. Well, used to back before I met June, I mean. Never made it this far down. Always wanted to. I told myself I would one day, come back with the woman I love. Good old love and romance, I remember that, Rick says. I remember it too, Andy says. This one protested, but she's here. We made it. June smacks Andy's tattooed bicep. I run a business and have a daughter, she says. All I need right now is to be eaten by a jaguar or get some tropical disease. Rick reaches down with one hand, his other never leaving the wheel, and produces a can of beer. He glances at Andy and June to see if they will dare to voice disapproval. Yeah, we do have jaguars, he says. Scarce on diseases, though. Plenty of beer. Want one? Can I smoke instead? June asks. Sure. He swigs a beer as they hit a patch of bumps. The road is an unpaved swath, cutting through untouched jungle on both sides, broken up only by the infrequent clearing or sign indicating the presence of one of the few area businesses. A paved road is on the way, supposedly. Someday it's going to really come, along with cops and rules. Well, real ones. For now, we're still free here, though. For now. There's no AC in the cabins. You'll want to get the ceiling fans going, and it's perfect, June says. Rick sees her face light up as she takes Andy's hand. It's already perfect here. I see what you mean, June says. You were right. I can see myself staying here forever. Andy is painfully aware she didn't say us. A small thing, considering all sign of the nicotine-starved, sleep-deprived, uptight, worried bundle of nerves he spent the long day of travel comforting has disappeared into the tropical heat and sun. Why the change of tune, sweetheart? Rick asks. Andy braces for June to blast him for the patriarchal endearment. But no, there's only that faraway look on her face, the one she wears when she's in the place she goes when in the grip of her lowest lows, the place he can never reach her. There's a jaguar, June says, nearby. What? Andy asks. I can feel her. I see her spots. She's almost all black. You can just make them out. You see her when she moves, then she's gone into the jungle like, I don't know how to say it. We have to find her. I have to see her. Andy and Rick exchange an inquiring stare, each expecting the other to offer an explanation. I guess this means we're going after all, Andy says. I knew there was a reason I loved you. I'm down for going right fucking now. Easy, cowboys, Rick says. You don't have to go far to see a jaguar. We've got one around here, exactly like the one you described. Damn if I know how you did that. Hell, you near picture perfect described the jaguar I call Cygnus. She comes out of the preserve every night. Why they get a taste for our garbage is beyond me. Andy's always wanted to go. That's why he planned this whole trip. To take me. You heard the lady. Is there anywhere around here we can rent a car, June asks? Or maybe do you think we can use your truck? You're my guest. After you lovebirds settle in, I'll do my best to be of service. Rick knows the Jaguar King doesn't like outsiders. He wonders what's he going to think of these weekend warrior hipster has-been wannabes. Stupid question. He knows the Jaguar King doesn't care for humans at all. Okay, that's the introduction to where the Jaguar King lives in the dark heart of the wood. So yeah, the book, which brings us to our first topic of cryptids. So the Jaguar and the Jaguar King isn't necessarily a real cryptid. Perhaps it's more of lore or folklore. He's somewhat of a made-up cryptid. But it brings us to our first topic of conversation: cryptids in both in fiction. And Michelle, being a Bigfoot researcher, we have the opportunity to talk about cryptids in fact. So to our panel here, what's a good example, or how do cryptids? Let's just talk about in fiction. Is there any stories about cryptids that come to your mind, or if not, like what inspires us to be so fascinated?
I mean, there are definitely plenty of cryptids in fiction. Maine fiction has a long history of that, dating back to the Victorian era, interestingly enough. And then into the modern era with authors like Rick Howdala, and some people would argue even Stephen King, kind of treading into that territory a little bit. I don't know. I mean,
what's an example of a Maine, like a historical, a Victorian Maine cryptid? What would they write about, or what was that's so fascinating?
The author C.A. Stevens, Charles Asbury Stevens, wrote quite a few stories, all set, in the outdoor realm. He and his friends used to go on extensive camping and hiking expeditions, and hunting expeditions into the wilderness. And so a lot of his stories are drawn from his personal experience and from the stories he heard from friends.
That was my next question. I'm like, what prompted him? Like, are they Bigfoot stories, or what are the cryptids is this maybe before the term Bigfoot was coined? If so,
it's before the term Bigfoot was coined, but there are definitely wild men or Bigfoot type creatures in his stories.
That's awesome. What year was he writing?
He was writing in the late 1800s into the early 1900s.
So that's just so great in that, like, it's just like another avenue of evidence or of anecdote, of just saying like, oh, like, well, before there's this thing that we're talking about now, and like looking in the historical record, it's like, yeah, this is fiction, but it wasn't like a secondary world like Narnia that this guy is making about. He's like, yeah, I'm writing about the ape men in my town.
Yeah, and he wasn't the only one. There were other Victorian era writers who were writing short stories about this stuff or incorporating it into their poetry or their longer works. So he wasn't the only one. So there's a thread of that runs through the Victorian era adventure fiction, which is
wow,
kind of astonishing if you think about it.
It makes me so much more interested in Victorian era. I have to admit, not being versed in that. A previous guest on the show wrote a book about Victorian era ghost stories, which really piqued my interest. And now hearing that there's Victorian era cryptid stories and ghosts, it's like, maybe this era deserves a second chance. Rudi, are there any cryptids in fiction that pop into your mind that you've written or come across?
I think my stuff is pretty lacking in cryptids, really. I mean, there's the occasional odd stuff, but usually it's I don't know. Usually if it's odd animals, it's just really odd animals just showing up, sort of thing. Unlike your stuff where there's cryptids galore, and have been for quite a while. And the
cryptid
things
scale, the cryptid trigger warning, cryptid light, cryptid free, cryptid heavy.
Yeah.
What about cryptids? Cryptids not in fiction. So I was thinking about it in preparation for our talk, and I'm like, I wanted to say, okay, I'm the cryptid skeptic, but no, I'm not the cryptid skeptic. I've always believed in. I thought about it. I've always believed in things like Bigfoot. I'm thinking about like when and the Loch Ness Monster before I even knew what a cryptid was, because like I remember being a kid, because I remember being scared shitless and just being a kid and being like, oh, the little swath of forest, not even forest, like the tiny strip behind my house. I was just like, Bigfoot's gonna get me. So if I was afraid of it, obviously I wasn't like, it wasn't a fake fear. I believed, and fear is a thing of belief. And then I also, my earliest memories of cryptids and belief, being like a kid in our local school library. I just remember seeing photographs of researchers like, oh, that's a fin of the Loch Ness Monster or of this. So I just remember having a fear and a curiosity, which I feel like that those are two elements of what is belief. And as I grew up, I don't know where it necessarily came from, but I felt like I had to, and it was an honest feeling, but I wanted to couch those beliefs or not beliefs in the language of science. Maybe because like there was so much hoaxes. There's so much things that were done for the money where it's like, oh, that's a hoax, or that's got to be fake. That I just became more and more interested in the language of science or the quantifying it in science. But then also as I grew up more and just learned more about this world we live in, quantifying it in the language of psychology, or like what we might bring to it. So yeah, but believer or not, speed round. Michelle, believer, skeptic? None of the above?
This is the perennial question.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time saying that I believe in Bigfoot, yet I spend a huge amount of my time wondering about it, thinking about what I would do if I encountered one, like in a realistic way, like what are the ramifications politically, civically, biologically, so I think, if I'm lucky enough to someday have an encounter myself, then I will be able to say, yes, I believe. But until that time, I guess you'd have to say I take an agnostic viewpoint. I'm very open to it. I'm very interested in it. I know the people that I've talked to who are eyewitnesses or people who've had encounters, they're not lying to me. They encountered something they can't explain. putting a label on it as to what it is, it seems premature, because I really think the crux of it is that we don't know. We don't know what it is. We've put a name on it for, you know, the sake of pop culture and for discussion. But
I love that you said that about the label, right? Because I want to like change my answer to like your answer, because like while I guess the reason I'm saying that is like, while I believe, I don't feel like it necessarily entitles me to have to believe in every piece of evidence or every label, right? So like, while I just like, if you ask me if I had to be binary, I don't have to be, but if I had to be binary, believe or not believe, it's like, oh, mountain gorillas up until, you know, whatever it was, 19 this or 19 that, they were a cryptid. There's no such thing. And then it's like, hey, what's up? Here's mountain gorillas. So I feel like Bigfoot is the easiest one for me to come closest to saying that, yeah, it's not even just past as prologue, history and what we call science, mainstream science, is full of like, full of animals either being extinct or not being there. And then, oh, sorry, you were wrong. And then anyone who's even had a house cat, it's like, you see how easy it is for your house cat to be scarce and not be found. It's like, it makes sense that like, yeah, like there could just be an ape or an ape-like creature out there that, whether it's a known ape or an unknown ape or an unknown biped, doesn't meet the criteria of science yet. So that's why I'm like, for Bigfoot, yeah, it's closest for me to be like, yeah. When we move along the spectrum of other cryptids or some other far theories, you know, it becomes, you know, a lot more wanting to apply is it Carl Sagan's extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and that's where I guess researchers like you come in. You do a lot. Can you tell us about your book? Is this one I'm thinking of is it's called Bigfoot in Maine, and if I was glancing through it, you're capturing and quantifying a lot of the oral history and interviewing people in Maine who've had encounters. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Oral history is definitely my current focus. I started from a recorded history perspective, though, digging through old newspapers, the Victorian fiction that we were talking about, which a lot of which also appeared in periodicals at the time. And
do we want to start? Do we want to back it up there, because there's a very fascinating one. What is the there was a very famous account that was in periodicals of the I'm gonna garble the name. Was it like, but you know, like, was it called the Ape Man of Maine, or like was it with the railroad? What was the account of like? A very famous one.
The Waldoboro one.
I think you mentioned it. Yeah, it's in the early chapters of your book.
It's the McHenry one.
So there was a lot. This was in newspapers and just had a lot. I mean, this was news back in the day. I mean, this was something like what was going on there? Was this an ape? Was this an escaped ape, or was this a cryptid?
So when I looked at the story, because nobody seems to have been able to nail down any original local articles for it, which would be a red flag for a researcher generally, because there were newspaper editors who, for the sake of publishing something sensational that the readers would latch onto or would create controversy, they were perfectly happy to make up stories occasionally. So the fact that we haven't been able to track back to an original article makes it difficult. However, a lot of Maine's early newspapers, you know, kind of came into and out of existence quickly. Nobody bothered to archive them, or they got destroyed by fires, weather, anything. So it's not completely out of the question that there were earlier articles about it. But the other interesting thing about it was that it was not presented as like a giant ape man. This was a tiny ape man, and the description of it sounds so close to what basically a spider monkey would be, that again, that seems reasonable as well. I dug into Maine history, and there were that area is not very far from ports, because a lot of Maine, the Maine coast is epic, and it has many river inlets that go far up that had at the time harbors deep enough that ships could travel pretty far upriver, like surprisingly far compared to what they could do now. And sailors were like, there are records of sailors coming to Maine with monkeys. So it's not out of the question.
And it comes, it brings up the subject of expectation, points in history, cultural expectation, or just expectation. Like, so for whatever reason, I was ignorant. I did not even know, or I forgot that porcupines there's such a thing as a North American porcupine. I just thought that they were just South American things. And one day up in the Catskills, my nephew and I encountered this weird thing. I mean, obviously it's a porcupine. We saw this weird creature climbing up a tree, and I'm just like, I do not recognize that. There's a baby Bigfoot. I mean,
wouldn't be the first time,
right? But honestly, as I had the panic, okay, we stopped. There's a weird creature. It's real. Okay, I'm just going through what I went through. I'm like, I do not identify that. Okay, what is that? What is it? It looked, it looks like a monkey, but it's not. For a second, it went through me. Okay, that, that's just sort of baby Bigfoot, until luckily it stayed in sight where I was able to, and with internet and all that stuff was able to do it. But you can see how the human perception is so flawed and put through the mind. It's put through the filters of the mind, how easy it can be to misinterpret or make up something.
Yeah. And I mean, think about the pre-internet era where you couldn't double check all that stuff on the fly. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Many people had never seen a lot of the creatures elsewhere in the world, or even in their own backyards, depending on, how much time they were spending in the woods. And so, your visual vocabulary of the fauna in your area was limited enough, and then your knowledge of the fauna in other parts of the world was practically non-existent.
I feel like I'm living proof of unscientific proof of how that happened, how quickly I was able to go there. We're going to come back to the notion of anecdotal experience. I just want to go over to Rudi. Rudi, skeptic or believer, or where on said scale do you fall?
I think it depends on the cryptid. There's some that I think are more plausible, I don't know, Tasmanian tigers. Seems like, oh yeah, you could have them lurking somewhere. Or other recently extinct things
what's that fish called? Coelacanth?
Yes, coelacanths,
Right.
Yeah.
Or Eskimo curlews or something where
Let's
supposedly
move
got
on
wiped
to the
out
ones
in the 50s, but maybe.
So let's move on to let's move on to the big three. Bigfoot, or at least the big three for me when I was a kid, which were Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and the Yeti were my big three. Where are you on those?
I'm a big Loch Ness Monster fan from way back. So, I mean, I think rationally they've done an awful lot to look at every cubic inch of the loch, but it would be awfully cool if there's something there. So maybe I'm rooting for them if they aren't there.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, and I am way less of an expert than many, and Michelle in particular, in terms of Bigfoot or Yetis. It seems like, I don't know, I'd say there's enough possibility to kind of keep it breathing as a thing, something to stay interested in and keep watching, because there's a lot of territory out there. There's a lot of different ways that maybe something could be going on that maybe we haven't quite thought of yet that would connect some of the different experiences folks have had. So I don't know, try to stay open-minded, but I'm not coming in convinced they're out there, but I'm certainly going to keep my ears open. If a story comes along. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe a wishy-washy answer there, but
no, it's much better than a binary answer. But yeah, like, so there is so much. There is so much out there. A lot of, and I as I grew older, I always and was more fascinated with it. It came to be like, and especially in today's days, it's always like, oh, always follow the money. Who has something to gain from the latest hoax or the latest this or the latest that? But we're not here to really talk about that. Despite getting all that off the table, sometimes you come across things that, and we were talking about some of this off camera, but we were getting ready here. There's not that. So, Michelle, at some point you moved on to having interviews and anecdotal and the oral experience. Could you perhaps tell us about that and maybe even read an account from your book?
Oh, sure.
Or tell us about some of the interviews, and then let us know what you're going to read from your book if it's not one of the oral experiences.
Sure. It's probably one of the more terrifying parts of the process of researching the book was, cold calling people, people who might not want to talk to me.
Yeah.
People who might start to talk to me and then change their mind. I'm very much a people pleaser by nature. And it's been a really tough lesson for me to learn that, I cannot, nor should I please everybody all of the time. But this is a strange situation where, I am very invested in hearing and recording their stories. So it puts me in a really delicately balanced position so far as that goes.
And what position is that? Is it to make them feel comfortable enough where they want to be open and honest with you while still maintaining your I guess journalistic distance? Or
yeah, I mean that I can do. What can't be calculated are, the human foibles that are attached to all of this, because for most people that I talk to, whatever encounter they had, no matter how brief or how fleeting, it changed their life. So in one sense or another, it was a fundamental experience in their life, whether or not they figured out what to do with it. So it can be very touchy and very mercurial in how they navigate that as they're returning to it and telling it to you. Some people seem relieved by the process. Other people get defensive. Other people worry that you're taking advantage of them or taking something from them. So it's a very tricky thing to navigate.
yeah.
In that sense, every question is potentially a loaded question. So it's very tricky. So
No, I can imagine that, because I mean there's such a scale of how humans react to the supernatural or the unknown. And when I mean supernatural, I mean other than the explained. Like sometimes people are just be like, yep, okay, that was a thing, and all right, what's for dinner, and just move on and either just file it away, forget about it, or as I realized that to think about the other side of that scale, as you said, how much it was a catalyst to them, how much it meant something to them. It's just two different points in human psychology. Is there any standouts or something from the book that you'd read for us or share with us today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to read one of my favorite stories.
All right. We'll turn it over to you and introduce it to us, and we're going to solo screen you. And
all right. Yeah, so this is one of the early stories in the book, early chapters in the book. I should say it's not a story. It's somebody's experience. I try to be clear about that. And this is something that took place over a few years. So between, say, 1975 and 1978 in Brunswick, Maine, which is about 25, 30 minutes kind of north of where I live here in Portland. I've been to this location and it's amazing. And I hope to go back there again, hopefully more than once. But this is Mike Ledbury's account of what he referred to as neighbors out of a National Geographic. So I first found Mike's post, which at the time was just a sentence or two online in 2011. And in 2018, I sent him a message and he agreed to a phone interview. I was interviewing another person that evening, but arranged to call Mike last since his email mentioned that, quote, "This is more than a simple sightings story." Mike is the first person to ask me more questions up front than I asked him, which was a really interesting experience. He wanted to know if I had experienced anything abnormal myself, which I answered no, truthfully, but I knew a lot of people who had, and I have a natural curiosity about the unexplained, plus a very open mind. He asked if I was an animal lover, and that was easy. Anybody who follows me online knows about my cats. So once we got those formalities out of the way, the real talk about his Class A encounter began. It is, to set the scene, it is 1975. Mike is 15 years old. Fed up after arguing with his father, he heads outside. He's not going far, just enough to avoid more conflict for tonight. He crosses the road and sets off across the large field facing it. He's heading for a little farm shack, set into the edge of the woods, a quiet place where he can build a campfire alone under the stars where no one will bother him. In the woods just behind the shed is a ravine. Between the pop and crackle of his fire, Mike hears noises down there, heavy noises. It's not moose or deer, and his mind jumps at once to other possibilities. Could it be a ticked-off bear? He tries warning it off by yelling, but the noise continues. Suddenly, pieces of rock, wood, and other debris pelt his campsite. This doesn't make any sense. What creature would do that? Unnerved, Mike puts out his campfire. He's not willing to head home yet, but he wants to distance himself from these disturbances, so he heads for the big hill nearby. At the top of the hill is a knoll filled with grass about 3 feet high, perfect to lie in comfortably without being seen. It doesn't take long for Mike to fall asleep. Later, he's woken again. In a cluster of trees about 200 yards away, it sounds like someone is ripping branches down and tearing them apart. Mike stands up to see over the grass. It's a bright moonlit night, but he can't see what's making all that racket. So he yells, "Hey!" And something inside the tree stand roars back, a roar like he's never heard until later when he watches a National Geographic special about mountain gorillas. The next day, he talks to his friend Ben and convinces him to come investigate after school and chores. Walking through the late afternoon sun, Ben carries his shotgun, Mike a borrowed .22. They start at the grassy knoll, then track out over to the stand of alders. They examine the trees. Branches have been torn from the trees at a level which even Ben, who's over 6 feet tall, can't reach. Something ripped the branches down, shredded them, and made a pile of leaves in the glade. Both boys are perplexed. They head to the shack. Dusk is falling as they hear a noise from below in the ravine. Once again, a full-throated roar erupts from the shadows, and debris is launched at them from the woods. They yell, "What are you doing? Get out of here!" at what they think might be some troublemaker messing with them. The roaring continues, and Ben lets fly a shotgun round into the air. The overhead foliage as a warning. Sounds of rapid retreat are heard, but they don't give chase. They've had enough. They run home pell-mell across the field, asking each other breathlessly, "What is that thing? What is it?" Later, Mike goes for a weekend hike. Maine in autumn will take your mind off of most things, and it's a particularly nice day. He follows a game trail, which ends at a bit of a cliff, dropping about 60 feet down to a stream bed ravine. There's a lone pine tree next to the stream. Looking at the tree, he realizes something is looking back at him. It looks about 8 feet tall and is unmistakably covered in fur. Standing there with his mouth hanging open, Mike searches his mind for all the large mammals he knows from the area. But nothing he's ever seen compares to this. Not a bear or a moose or anything else. Whatever it is, it stands right there and stares back. There's nothing left to do but freak out. Mike turns around. He runs for home. His mind goes in circle. It looked like an ape, some big giant ape standing around. His mind reels and latches onto a local story from a couple of years earlier. Could it be the Durham ape? His mind wrestles with this and leaps sideways and lands on the concept of Sasquatch. But here in Maine? That's crazy. No way. What really matters is that it is undeniably some type of primate. He thinks to himself, this is an ape. And all the stuff I've been reading in National Geographic magazine or watching on a National Geographic TV show that my mom has us watch all the time, well, it'll come in handy now. Well, but what to do next? So part of any good investigation involves talking to locals. So Mike and his dad often make the rounds to other farms, picking up various things for repairs or improvements. With his mom running Fire Glow kennels on their property, there are always cats and dogs around, plus a variety of livestock. Between the animals and the crops, there are always things that need fixing and resupplying, like any working farm. Mike gets pretty handy at making inquiries. One throws the net wide. The basic starting point is often, did you ever see anything weird? Most of the time, nothing comes of it. He and his dad are at a farm in Durham along the woods that border Mike's home in Brunswick on the other side. The farmer seems receptive, and Mike feels encouraged enough this time to add, I've seen something. He relates his encounters to the man, who agrees he's seen something similar. While out on his tractor in the fields, he says, I see him, and he's just sitting there watching me. So I'll stop, I'll smoke my cigarette, and then he'll get up and walk away. It looked like a big giant ape, furry, kind of brownish, a flattish head. He just sits there and watches me, he said. Relieved to no longer be alone, Mike nods, adding, Yep, I've seen the same thing. The farmer hadn't told anyone because most folks would think he's crazy. Back home, life continues. Mike persuades Ben to go hiking a few more times. But they're followed through the woods constantly. Ben can't take it anymore. So although Mike still goes hunting and hiking with Ben, never again could he convince him to step foot near those particular woods. But this just fuels Mike's search. If this is the creature's home, it's his home too. And he's curious. He puts his skills to work investigating this mystery. Mike climbs up the highest ridge and scrambles up its tallest tree. Looking out over the valleys around his perch, he sits and observes. Sometimes he sees clues. One of the best indicators in the woods, especially in Maine, is the blue jay, he told me. An alert in one of the groves below from these noisy birds lets him know that something is going on under the tree cover. He quietly descends from his lookout tree, heading in that direction, listening as he goes. Sometimes he encounters a moose or a bear. Other times, his shadowy neighbor has just been by. He is sure it always knows exactly where he is. A competitive track runner at school, Mike thinks he can catch his pursuer. One day, he turns and chases the elusive form through the woods, following it uphill, trying to keep pace. After this effort, he decides the only way he'll catch it is if it wants him to. This at least rules out a man in a suit. He dons camouflage, only to find once again he's the one being followed. It's like it's playing with him. Mike has no one to talk to besides Ben, who's a good ear, but has no interest in joining again. His sisters know something is up. He's determined to get to the bottom of the puzzle somehow. He researches the methods used by Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall as they move towards a human-ape understanding. He needs to gain proximity to this mysterious creature. He begins experimenting with different methods. He tries to move through the forest like it does and sits still for long periods of time, watching and listening. He wants to gain its respect and eliminate fear and cultivate familiarity. In 1977, now around 17 years old, Mike decides to take a real step forward. And I think I need to leave a cliffhanger there.
Fascinating, a fascinating account. So much of it rings has a verisimilitude to it, or not a verisimilitude, because it is an account, right down to just, yeah, if you've ever been around a blue jay, you just know that a blue jay is, it's not going to tell you what's there, but yeah, just even in the suburbs, a blue jay is going to tell. All the other birds are going to look to that, like, oh, okay, when the blue jay flies, we don't need to bother to look. We're just going to fly, because that's what you do. It's an indicator.
Yeah.
And just things about the natural inherent to the geography. You're like, no, a man isn't doing that. A man isn't gonna. A person can't do that. And if you've ever been around a tracker or an animal, that sense of, I'm being tracked, or the sense of like something, I'm not going to see it. Like we're talking about going back to the jaguar story.
Oh,
just
yeah.
I've been around, like, yeah, like, you're not going to be around a big cat. It's going to be really hard for you to know. It's for you to know it first before it knows you're there.
Before it wants you to.
It's such a truism. It's a story for another day. But yeah, like that really was fascinating to listen to that account, which is a good transition to, and also the part of saying, like, yeah, this is its land, this is its space, and that's why I find, like, cryptids in liminal spaces seem to have a Venn diagram and an overlap, or at least for us as the outsiders or the explorers. Yeah, there's something about, you can't have a creature without its habitat and its space. So that's just always fascinating to me. A question about the book. You mentioned you're still researching for volume 2 of the book.
Yeah.
A follow-up, because I do remember you writing in one of the earlier chapters something that's absent. What was intentionally absent from the book was accounts having to do with the indigenous people or the Native Americans from the area. And he said part of that is that, hey, some things are just not meant to be shared. Some things are just not meant for everyone. And some of these things are just, built on relationships and trust. But that I'm sure that's a big part of the picture. Has there been any, what's your experience been like since the writing of the book on that aspect?
Yeah. I have actually, well, there are a few people who are in the book who self-identify as tribal members. But, again, they're telling their personal experiences, which they felt belonged to them and fell outside of the purview of the tribe and its traditions. And since then, I've also talked to more people who, are, tribal members either here or away living here, members from tribes that aren't native to Maine. And it's pretty clear that there are traditions associated with the history of these creatures and the interaction with them. And as one person told me, they're not humans, but they're people. And I think the approach I tried to take with the book, which is in some ways the approach that Mike Ledbury tried to take with his neighbors, his mysterious neighbors, is one of neighbors, one of respect, because you're sharing this space. Like in your Jaguar King story, where the narrator was talking about how the jaguar knew where the line was between the safe space of, the preserved space and the human space where something might happen to it. So I think there's a lot of that, if we want to track right into the whole liminality thing, I think it's that those adjoining spaces are the crux of the matter with encounters and interactions with these creatures. And that's what I try to focus on, because again, it's not my story to tell if it is associated with that tradition. That's theirs to tell. So I will continue to navigate around that. And, there are some tribal members who are interested in speaking about it, especially because they've had their own experiences. And so that will be navigated differently. But again, it's a personal experience in a bigger history.
Right. It's a fascinating division of information. Like what is the story of us, what belongs to the culture and is not meant to, versus like what is me as an individual outside that. Like, yeah, I was driving home one night and this is very different than some of the beliefs and folklore and lore of a people that's not meant to be. That's simply not meant to be.
And so much of it is tied to the land, which we are all part of at this point, hopefully.
Well, I'm glad you said. I'm glad you said that, because the land is the crux of the matter.
Yeah,
as you said just a second ago, and it's the crux of the matter for non-cryptid animals. And they're always going to get the short end of the stick. It's like if you just a large. If we're talking about cats, cats have this. Big cats, they just have this natural range, and they're territorial and they're migratory, and they come back one day, or especially in California, and what was their range for instinctively that's part of them is now someone's backyard, and that little terrier, and it always ends up with the animal. We're laughing. I'm laughing because I'm laughing because otherwise I'd be crying. And it ends with the death. It always ends with the death of an animal.
Yeah,
but it just goes to show how understatement of how important land and land use and coexisting is.
Yeah, and navigating each other within that framework, because there are ways to work together and to respectfully maintain the land in the way it's entitled to be maintained and preserved without abusing it. And I just wish there was a more universal view.
Well, you're preaching to the choir on that.
I know.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I know.
It's the most important thing that we share.
Yeah. I know on the West Coast there are certain towns where, Bigfoots are a protected species, or it's codified, or there's law, and like you can laugh at that, but it's just like, well, I've heard a lot worse ideas in terms of practicality of doing that kind of stuff.
And I think it's an important thing for human beings to realize that there are places we probably shouldn't go, at least some of the time. Like, we don't have carte blanche to just go wherever we want, whenever we want. It's
good
not
luck with that. and I mean that in don't be mistaken. I'm just otherwise it's a knife through my heart.
Yeah.
But like all conflict, this is real. This isn't the stuff of story, but it's a good transition of just how conflict and setting is just so important. It's the stuff of good stories. It's the stuff of good fiction.
Yeah.
And Moving over to some Rudi's work is also one of the things that I like so much about it is that it is very setting based. Especially this newest project. Rudi, do you want to, by means of transition, tell us about? I'm calling it the ABCs of architecture, or the notes of imaginary places. Tell us a little bit about setting and this project.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is all about imaginary places, and one of the things I did when I was thinking of it is I was trying to think of something that I could do and have a bunch of pieces that would be related to each other in some way, but also both give me some room to do different things and also push me to do different things. So I've actually got a whole little grid made up of alphabetically 26 places, 26 professions for the different characters. I've got some other things going on in kind of opposite alphabets. So there's like a Z word that goes with the A place, and a same thing with the characters and the professions. So
I feel like I may have seen said spreadsheet, or if not, I've seen it.
Yes, I think possibly I may have shared it. There's a whole little grid. There's like 5 columns or something. So, but that has pushed me in some really interesting like story directions I wouldn't have gone otherwise, just to figure out how to kind of make sure I kind of touch on each of those. So yeah. And you're right. Yeah. I've always been very often starting from a place anyway. So it was kind of a natural fit.
Tell me about that, about starting. So does the inspiration come with a place or with a setting for you?
Sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of times it does. And I've got
how does that work for you? Tell me.
I mean,
maybe tell us about one of them. Like
well, I've got several ideas that I've got the place, but I don't have the they have kind of got a character, but I don't really know what would be happening to them in the place, how they're interacting with it or exploring it, or how they've come to be there. Yeah,
I'm so interested in that because I mean that I feel like that is definitely my process. I don't end up by choice. That's just where inspiration strikes me. And then, the next step is what you say, like, where does the characters and thus the conflict come out of that place? So that is like when, that is the process for me is then developing it. So I'm really, that's one of the things that drew me to this whole series about place. Where are all the stories? Was at one point, are they all intended to be flash fictions, or are they grown? Are these short stories or like short stories at this point?
Well, I was aiming to have them be maybe a little bit larger than flash fiction, but I keep missing that. So, I was aiming
a nice thing for us who like the stories if you're missing the mark. That
I was trying to, like, flash fiction is usually under 1,000 words. I was trying for 1,000 to 1,500, and I keep getting 2,000, 3,000 plus, So
all right. Well,
yeah.
I don't think you've heard too many. Well, at least there's no complaints from me as a reader of the stories.
And when you read the introduction earlier, I realized I really need to change the description I have out there, because I have now gone way off of monthly. Like, I think it was 15 or 18 months between the last two. So
time is just relative.
Yeah.
It's a month. We're talking on the planetary scale, perhaps.
Yeah.
or solar system. But speaking of flash fiction, many of the stories in Creatures of Liminal Space, and this is not just to bring it back to the book, but you're no stranger to flash fiction. You had many years ago, you were one of the founders of a flash fiction project, which was called the Daily Cabal. And before we talk about my involvement of that, let's just tell people what the idea of the Daily Cabal was, and then I'll jump in and tell you how I got drawn into said maelstrom?
The idea came up at some point. Jeremiah Tolbert and I were talking. Jeremy is a writer himself, although he's doing a lot of other creative pursuits these days.
And publisher at one point of the was it the Fortean Bureau? Was the name of his?
The Fortean Bureau,
not the Fortean Times, but the Fortean Bureau was his fiction website inspired by the Charles Fortean project. Yes.
So, come to think of it, I guess stuff that I publish there would have to have a cryptid of some kind.
Well,
so,
or some sort of
or something like it, something Fortean going on. Yeah.
Something Fortean going on.
Yeah. But somehow through, just talking about some other ideas we'd seen batted around online, we came up with the idea of gathering up a group of writers, writing, just kind of swapping back and forth between all of us, and each weekday having one story go up on the site. For some reason, we decided it would be flash fiction of 400 words or less. Not quite sure why we chose 400, but it was maybe definitely
because of the aim issue. Like if you're aiming for 400 and you get 800, you're lucky, right? Because as someone who's written, eventually I came to be one of those writers, and I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience for me, just on that technical level, just on the craft level of learning how to tell a story, and then learning how to tell an effective story in those word counts. Even if you were above that, like it was. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a it was a very creative period for me, and also very. I feel like I really learned a lot, even if I can't put my finger on it, on how to make it happen in those word counts.
Yeah, I hadn't done very much flash fiction writing before that, and then I wound up doing quite a bit. Particularly because as one of the facilitators, if something went wrong with our schedule and somebody couldn't make it, I occasionally found myself like,
well, what do you mean by if? Now, are you saying that having a different story every day for a period of 2 to 3 years was that there were issues with that? No, that can't be.
Well, I mean, it's not a coordination, and we were worldwide because we had one writer living in Japan at the time, a couple who were in Australia.
Yeah, I loved that. I love being. Thank you for having me be a part of that. And I love the diversity and just the breadth of stories that came out of there. It was really wonderful. Even if it was just like, hey, who's got the story for tomorrow? How many times? And there's a lesson in that in writing. Like if left to my own devices, I would love to have everything be thousands and thousands of words and take forever to do it. And then it's just like, hey, it's 500 words by tomorrow, or you're letting people down. And there's something really potent in that for this writer, for sure. I'm sure you experienced that even more, being the coordinator of that.
Yeah, and it was so cool to see what people came up with, what different people came up with. And I mean, we generally were all doing our own things, but every once in a while, like I think a couple of years when we had, we hit the anniversary of the site, we would get somebody else to give us some kind of prompt that we all then tried to do.
There was a lot of experimentation. Yeah. And, there was a lot of experimentation, and some of it worked and some of it didn't. I think that's like, that was the joy of it. Speaking of the stuff that worked, so the Daily Cabal relates to Creatures of Liminal Space in that when the other Dan Sauer and I were putting the book together, it was going so well that, Dan said, hey, like, let's expand this book. Let's make this a full collection. And fast forwarding from the Daily Cabal, I had thought I had lost all those stories, but at one point during the pandemic, long story short, Rudi recovered all the stories from me. Maybe they didn't need to be recovered. Maybe Rudi knew where they were all along, but they were lost. They were lost for me. And these were stories I had not seen or revisited for 10, 15 years. And then at one point, Rudi helped me get them again. And so I decided that I would reevaluate some 40, close to 50 stories. I reevaluated this set of stories like, A, did it have a cryptid in it? B, was there liminal space or something liminal in it? Or the Venn diagram of both were the winners. And that so I think 11 of them made it into the book. Talking about experimentation, and one of the better experiments were sometimes you would riff on your colleagues' stories. So there's one story in the book called In Search of Elephant Corners that's in Creatures of Liminal Space. And I know that that's based on a Rudi Dornemann story. Which one is it based off of?
Mine was called At the Elephant Corners.
Okay. Without further ado, can we hear At Elephant Corners, and we'll follow it up with In Search of Elephant Corners, and we'll just show people what was going on here.
Yep. Okay.
Turn it over to Rudi.
All right. So At the Elephant Corners. It took Sylvie all morning, steering her motorbike through crowded market streets and up stairway alleys, before she found the corner and the 4 bas-relief elephants right where the fortune teller said they'd be, sculpted into the stone of each building at the intersection. The second-floor balconies perched like howdahs on the backs of the elephants, and the doors were half hidden in the legs that were the building's front corners. Sylvie tugged the bell pull by the knee of the blue elephant's door leg, heard a faint chime and the sound of feet downstairs. The door opened. A woman bent from the second step. She wore a long dress, black and covered with tiny glinting beads, her hair wrapped in a white towel, as if just washed. She curled her hand in a gesture that seemed to mean Sylvie should follow, and led the way up. The fortune woman had said Sylvie would die soon and horribly if she didn't stay in the elephant long enough to hear 3 things. They came up into bright sunlight on the howdah porch. Beyond it, the room went back into shadows. Sylvie saw couches and cushions on which more women in dark dresses sat or lounged, incense so heavy she nearly sneezed. From below, the sputter pop of her motorbike, someone stealing it or trying to, and she almost ran back down the stairs. A life-size silver gorilla sculpture, on top of which someone had left a dusty bowler hat. "For any who visit," said the woman, "you can go no further, bareheaded." Sylvie put it on. The thief had the motorbike rumbling close to the right note. Sylvie's palms sweated. Ever since the last accident, she knew every time she started the bike, every time she made a delivery, it might lead to a final accident. That's why she'd found the fortune teller. The whine of her bike increasingly distant as Sylvie walked into the room, stepping around cushions. This must have been the fortune teller's plan. Send her here so her bike would be stolen and she couldn't die in a crash. "Not many find us," said the woman. That was the second thing that Sylvie had heard. Sylvie had escaped death, but without a bike, she doubted there was anything the fortune woman could do to avoid Debtor's Island. "What is this place?" said Sylvie. "It is the fortune teller's school." The woman spread her arms. She smiled. Women on nearer couches looked up. "And you are our newest student." So that's the first part.
It's such a liminal space before I even knew of liminal space. Is that the first part of the story, or is there more?
I mean, that's the first elephant.
That's the first
corner story.
Right,
either or any of us did.
Right, because we're sort of cats out of the bag that there's the
Yeah.
third. There's a third that I didn't even remember. So yeah, I love. I just I love that, and I haven't heard that since I first read it all those years ago, and it still has that liminal, dreamlike, yet fantastical and dangerous aspect that I just love about your work. So that was fantastic to hear. So now I'm gonna read In Search of Elephant Corners, and it's just I'm just enjoying it, seeing like, oh, this probably happened, like, hey, it's your turn for a story by the morning, and a combination of loving Rudi's work and just having to come up with it on the fly led to it. But it's just cool to just see what old me picked up on and why I did it. So it's super fun doing this. I'm going to read In Search of Elephant Corners, inspired by At the Elephant Corners. The thief's shade was trying to follow Sylvie back to Elephant Corners again. She heard the phantom whine of her motorbike's engine, though it was nowhere to be seen on the street crowded with the bustle of day sellers closing shop and patrons gathering for the night market. She'd been studying under the elder fortune tellers for weeks. The half-day search on her motorbike to find the 4 elephant-shaped buildings she called home seemed so far away. Why did it take me so long to find my way here? Sylvie had asked before her daily walk to the market to fetch fresh chicken bones for the divination cups. We are almost in the center of the city, right in plain sight, for anyone to see or follow. Ganesha is the remover of obstacles, the fortune woman called Katerina had answered, then affectionately patted an elephant figurine that looked much like the sculpted face of the building. Had it been Ganesha who removed the obstacles, preventing her from finding the fortune tellers? Ganesha who guided the thief who stole her motorbike. It wasn't Ganesha following her now. She could feel the thief's yearning, not just for her, to find Elephant Corners. The accident that had claimed him had been meant for her. It involved a blown tire, a refugee from the city of Theros, an old hero of the origami circuit. Chickens, a lot of them. And a contraband shipment of vampire vine. The shade followed her most evenings and was always thwarted by one fortuitous distraction or another. One time by a raucous trip of escaped chickens. Another by a pretty lady muttering charms under her lacy veil. Yet another by a tiny rainstorm moving almost purposefully throughout the stairway alleys. But today was the day of dragon kites and tombstones, at least according to the calendar of Sylvie's ancestral home. The day spirits will rise and walk in the flesh of the unwary if given a chance. The shade slowly but steadily pursued her through the market streets and winding alleys. To Sylvie's dismay, no distractions appeared to hinder it. Sylvie ducked into a side street, hoping to lose it with speed, but the egress was blocked by an ostrich caravan. She gulped, trying to gather the courage to run back out and past the invisible, menacing presence. The sputter pop of her lost motorbike was almost upon her. "Just go away," she cried, afraid the shade would touch her and ride her body back to Elephant Corners. The motorbike sounds retreated. The shade had moved to a piece of glow taffy on the cobblestones. Sylvie spied another piece at the entrance to the next alley. A trail? She was in luck. The shade followed, and Sylvie ran home. "Why?" Sylvie asked Katerina once she was safely behind the door of the Blue Elephant. "How did I escape? Why can no one find Elephant Corners when it is in plain sight?" "Ganesha protects this place," she answered. "Today you learned he is also the placer of proper obstacles." Sylvie thought about it. The shade had wanted something. From her. From Elephant Corners. The fortune tellers must have had a reason to prevent her death in the bike crash. Maybe if she continued her study, she'd be able to find the answer. Patterns of the past? Or divine its shape from the ripples it sent into the ever-changing future. So I just noticed a lot of Rudi Dornemann story Easter eggs in there as well. And I was pleased to be like, oh. And so that was like and a tribute. So yeah, one of the things we did, it was a tribute to each other. That was definitely a tribute to a lot of the stories of Rudy's that I liked.
Yeah, I was spotting that, but then again, some of them are like kites. I mean, that could be either.
Yeah.
So,
no. That was clearly on my end. There's at least 2 or 3 clearly referencing some of your stories, but that's another discussion for another day. Speaking of another day, we're gonna a bit of a change of plan. We're running out of time, so I'm not gonna read what I had intended to read, but let's move on. Can we? I'd love to hear within the time we have remaining. Can we hear one of the notes of Imaginary Places? Would you read for us, Rudi?
Oh, sure. All right.
Then I'll turn it over to Rudi. Introduce the series and the piece one more time.
Yeah. So it's a series of short stories that I'm publishing simultaneously in a online newsletter and in a podcast, which is very simple podcast, just me reading the story. Yeah, there are going to be 26 of them eventually. Right now, I think this is a bit of the latest story, which is number 14. So just barely past halfway. The next story is 2/3 done. Who knows? Hopefully it won't take me forever to get that one done. But yeah, so they're each set in an imaginary place. As I mentioned earlier, each one has a character who has is kind of defined a little bit by their profession. I don't think I've had any characters with names, the main characters with names anyway. And I think I've revealed before that each setting, each building type secretly is based off of some kind of animal. And actually this one kind of bends that rule a bit because the animal in this case is ibises, and the place is a restaurant, which actually it doesn't have a name. It just has a logo of 2 ibises with crossed beaks. And I'm skipping the part where you find out a little bit about the restaurant, that you go there and to order, there's no menu, there's blank cards that they give you with a pen, and you have to completely make up your own alphabet and write a bunch of symbols on the card and then point to them as if you're ordering something from this menu you've just written that no one can read. And then they bring you something kind of random, but usually really good. So yeah, I'm skipping a little ways into this to kind of look at kind of a liminal place or a threshold place that the character is experiencing as the story goes on. So yeah, so I'll just read a few pages kind of out of the middle of this to give you a taste of that. So yeah, this is about the gem cutter. Her time in the restaurant was peaceful, as if she'd chipped into her workday and lifted out a small piece of the otherwise nonstop tension, releasing the pressure built up behind all those hours of precision. After lunch at the Ibis place, she'd walk back to the studio, settle in at her bench, reach for her tools, and feel an inner balance that lasted for at least the next couple of stones. Afternoons were the gem cutter's busy time. Gems arrived at her workbench wrapped in diagrams that showed the complicated geometry of facets she needed to create. Penciled in the corner of each diagram was the time when the completed polished stone must be handed over to the metalsmith, who would set it in whatever ring or brooch or necklace would become its home. The deadline the gem cutter needed to meet so that the sales floor could fulfill the promises it had made. The penciled times were never far enough into the future. She used those deadlines to carry her through her post-lunch lethargy, let the irresistible forward-rushing motion propel her around any obstacles that arose. Her decisions became more instinctive, her cutting strategies more decisive, her movements, always irrevocable, became even more certain. The burrs and wheels with which she cut and polished were like her fingertips. Sometimes by the end of the day, her true fingertips had picked up enough loose diamond grit and leavings from the stones she'd worked that she thought they looked like strange new tools themselves. It would be impossible, of course, for her to shape diamonds with her hands alone, but occasionally she'd daydream as she cleared her desk at the end of the day. She wasn't sure if it would make her more precise or less, if she'd have more control over her results. Sometimes she got so lost in the process that she looked up to see the cut gems sitting in front of her as if the diagrams had bloomed into three-dimensional reality on their own, leaving her desk dusted with chips and splinters and her hands gloved in a fairy cast of glittering gem sand. She took those moments as signs that she should put down her tools, spend a few minutes doing hand exercises, and look far away out the window, as far away as her eyes could focus. All to keep herself from continuing to cut and cut, from chasing perfection deeper and deeper into the stone. She had a half belief, half superstition that there was a guiding image hidden in the heart of every stone. Some twist in the crystal that mimicked and prefigured the outer design that she crafted, a truer version that she could never see, and for which all her work was only an elaborate shell, an innermost geometry purer than anything her hands could create. She felt the secret gravity of that gem heart tugging at her every cut, guiding her as she shaped, the source of the steadily escalating rightness she felt as each refining polish brought her closer to the stone's final, fully realized form. On days when the gem heart pull was particularly strong, she always made sure to visit the restaurant of the ibises. One day, when the day's secret special hadn't rebalanced her quite enough and she wound up cutting a little too deep, she saw a tiny image of herself in the gem setter, looking back out at her. She took it for a reflection that had bounced from facet to facet enough times to turn the image around so that it wasn't reversed anymore. The tiny version of the grinder she was using appeared in the same hand as real life. Gazing at the image was entrancing, mesmerizing, and she forced herself to turn the stone over, to make a balancing cut, although not quite as deep, not quite as revealing. After that, she knew what was down there. Her reflected double, busy at her own cutting and polishing, following her own diagrams. That was the source of the pull she'd felt. She'd sensed that the far side of the image, where she herself was only a tiny reflection, was another world entirely. The next day, the inward pull persisted, grew and grew until she had to concentrate to hold her hand back from cutting all the way down to the reflection, or maybe even pressing further still. When lunch came, she headed directly to the Twin Ibis restaurant, lost herself in the mysteries of soup, appetizer, entree. She even accepted the second, smaller piece of paper the wait staffer offered her when the empty dishes were cleared away. The paper that the gem cutter always declined with a shake of her head, sometimes curt, sometimes reluctant. This day, however, she jotted out several lines of tangled hieroglyphics, pointed to one, and waited for dessert. All right, I'm gonna stop there, I think, and leave you to find out what she finds in the stones and how that has anything to do with the restaurant in the end.
I mean, I love ibises and I love hieroglyphs and soup, so I cannot I cannot love it anymore. Such a cool story. So people, tell us one more time, how can people sign up to get that sent directly to them?
Go to my website, rudidornemann.com, and that's Rudi, R-U-D-I, like it's spelled on the screen.
And you can check it out there's a link to it in the Facebook event page as well. We're not quite at the end yet. We're at the very tip of the end. Just one or two more things before we go. I want to just say thanks to all our friends and colleagues who are here. I see thank you, and hello to Joshua and Sarah and Audrey and Lisanne and Jenya and Dan and Cliff and Elad and anyone else we forgot. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. The other thing, I just want to make sure I don't mention, Michelle, can you show us your Green Hand shirt? Can I solo screen you? I noticed it because, oh, wow, I love it. I love it. Is it a frog or is it an axolotl?
It's a book goblin.
It's a book goblin. Even better.
The design is by Brandon Kawashima.
Oh, okay. I love his work.
Yeah.
I love his work. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he started out with this little guy many moons ago, and I was like, "Can you make me something else with him?"
Wow. So so if you're in Maine, you probably know where to go to the Green Hand Bookshop. Where can people, if you're not in Maine, can we shop at? Is it the Green Hand Bookshop? What's the name of the site?
It's greenhandbookshop.com.
Okay. Yeah. And can get copies of Bigfoot in Maine?
Yeah.
And what is the other book called? Is it called Strange Stories of Maine?
And also
and of course, yeah, we now have those in there as well.
Yes,
so,
Strange Maine is the other.
Strange Maine. So yes, of course, I think a lot of people have picked up the book, but if you haven't, or if you're looking for a gift for the book lover in your life, definitely pick up. Some of them are signed. Pick up a copy of Creatures of Liminal Space, or my other books are in stock over at the Green Hand there. We'll go back to mainstream. I wanted to read from the Loch Ness Monster, but that's going to be way too long. So before we go, and hopefully Rudi and Michelle stay connected once we sign off, so we could say our goodbyes. But I'm just going to read a short. I'm going to read the last story in Creatures of Liminal Space, which is called Houdini's Grave, and we'll read from the Loch Ness Monster story another place or another time. So here is this is called Houdini's Grave. I'm standing outside Starbucks on 2nd Avenue, and a woman with long dark hair called my name from across the street as if she knew me. She dashed over when the traffic passed and said, "Sorry I'm late. I hope I haven't kept you waiting too long. It's so nice to meet you." She had my name right, but she was obviously there for a blind date with another man. My fortune cookie at lunch had said, "Opportunity knocks," so I figured this was it, so we went inside. Then we walked, hot cocoa in hand, laughing at the storefronts already decorated for Halloween. We ended up in a cozy Irish pub. I've been on more than my share of bad dates, but things were going amazingly right. So right that I forgot it was all just a mistake. She was a painter, did charity exhibitions of her work for projects in South America. It wasn't just that she was tall and stylish with that long, dark hair. Well, that wasn't hurting. The way she spoke made me want to listen and gave me a sense of future. I found myself feeling oddly mournful that we hadn't met years ago. I wanted our story to start now, like I felt it was, so I had to come clean. "I'm not the guy you were supposed to meet," I said. "Of course you are," she said. She didn't get it. Then she asked me if I was doing anything on Halloween. I had a ticket to the Police concert in Madison Square Garden. She said a friend of hers was a famous magician, and a few of them were gathering at Houdini's grave. "The ultimate escape artist," she said, and then she talked as if she knew me for ages. About an abusive husband, a controlling ex-boyfriend. A small part of me said, this is too much, too fast, and that her fascination with Houdini was an ominous metaphor, a trapped woman looking for the first lockpick that comes along. But I didn't listen. It had started to rain, and she insisted on driving me to my car. "I'd love to go to Houdini's grave with you on Halloween," I said. "Sure?" she asked. "It's at midnight." "Absolutely." She wrote her number on the Starbucks napkin and gave me a pat goodnight. Our conversation continued on the phone the next evening. We stayed up late into the night, ending the conversation after she gave me directions to the grave. The next night, I wasn't able to reach her, nor the night after. and the night after. 2 weeks passed without word. I agonized about going to the graveyard or not. And now, standing here, alone, in the wet cold, waiting for midnight to come, I wonder if she was a figment of my imagination. Or if she got in touch with the man she was supposed to meet that night. I think of going to find her. I have her card. Then decide that's dangerously close to stalking. Turning my back to the wind, I realize she's out there. An instance of the potential of the situation being much safer than reality. I don't want her to turn out to be an invented ghost. But I have to know. So I steel myself against the October night, hoping this isn't where the story ends, but where it gets good. But this is where the story ends. It's where the book ends, and it's where our little show ends. So thank you to all our friends and colleagues for coming, and thank you so much for the awesome readings from Rudi and Michelle. And we'll see you next week. The next Nighttime Logic, I believe, is next week, and we have Philip Fracassi, Jonathan Jantz, and Dan Franklin who will be reading for you. And until then, thank you so much. Take care, everybody.